For those who are just joining in, again, my name is Alan Schimmel, Editor-in-Chief of DevOps.com, and thank you for joining us for another DevOps.com webinar. Today's webinar is sponsored by Evident.io, and the title of the webinar is Security Automation for DevOps. And it's a title that's near and dear to both myself as well as our panel members, who all have long histories within the security space as well as extensive experience within DevOps. So joining me today are Andrew Storms, who's VP of Security Services at NewContext, and Andrew, a personal friend and longtime member of the security community. Theodore Kim, who's Senior Director of SaaS Operations, and we're going to be featuring a little bit of a case study on JobLight today. And then finally, but certainly not least, another personal friend, Evident.io CEO Tim Prendergast. And Tim, like Andrew and myself, a longtime member of the security community, as well as active participant in the burgeoning DevOps and DevOps security community. Guys, welcome to today's webinar.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for hosting, Alan.
Okay. All right, we're going to jump right into things here. Let's move to the next slide. And, you know, and I'm going to, Andrew and Tim, we've kind of spoken about these topics before and in preparation here. And, you know, I think this is probably one of the key tenets of what has attracted us to DevOps from security, and that is the idea that DevOps is good for automating security. Is it self-evident, or do we need to convince people? Andrew?
I love that you asked that question of me first. And the reason, first I want to say thank you, to Alan and the Tim, the folks at Evident, to inviting me here today. Like Alan had alluded to earlier, I work at a company called NewContext, and we help customers build stronger infrastructure and software. And we've wrapped this around a methodology called lean security. And we love the word lean because it really deals with this idea that efficiency of the system. And so when you ask me this question, is it self-evident? I was laughing and chuckling because when I tell people, yes, you can deliver stronger software, at a faster rate, faster time to market, and with less cost, and like I said, make it stronger, they usually kind of chuckle and walk away. But these first two slides here, this one and the next one, are talking about the why, and then we're going to talk about the kind of the details of the how. And so when I think about the why is DevOps good for automating security, one of the fears that the security folks have is this constant churn of infrastructure. There's so many rates of change going on. And there's this fear that when things are changing so fast, they're out of the control of the security folks, and it really just opens up the door for bad things to happen within those change windows. But I look at it from the other side, which is the more things can change, the more opportunity there is to implement better security. Take it, for example, to implement better mitigation, or to just something like patching. No longer do you have to wait a month for the next change window to get in, the patches for, let's say, libpng just came out, a week ago, and that affects who knows how many, but a ton of systems. I'd hate to be that security guy who has to live with that risk in mind of, I know it's there and I can't patch it to the next change window. That's why I love this concept, and certainly let's hear from Tim as well what he has to say.
Yeah, what I always kind of say, and one of the things that people probably get sick of hearing me say, is that security historically has been half a decade or more behind the innovation in infrastructure. When we saw things like Chef and Puppet and Jenkins and all these cool ways to automate the manipulation of infrastructure come out, a whole bunch of us, like Andrew and myself, were sitting there scratching our head, wondering, like, where the heck is all the security innovation that takes advantage of this, rapid change capability? If you think back to the time when we had, big perimeter firewalls and, IDS appliances, no matter what change you wanted to make, you had to schedule a big downtime window, and you had to, notify customers before you could make anything. change by improving security or adding features or adding appliances to your infrastructure, those days are kind of gone. And what's so exciting about that is, if I have a set of servers that are running and I'm concerned about the integrity of them, I can literally just launch a new set and blow the old ones away within minutes, and we're back off and running. There's no way for you to have historically gone and reinstalled, your entire infrastructure when you had a physical constrained set of resources. So when we talk about, the automation capability here, it really means like anything that you can do deploying and managing infrastructure means you can bring that security context to it. And by having that ability, it means that instead of having these two diametrically opposed forces pulling and pushing on your infrastructure, that being like the application delivery piece and then the security side, those forces are actually unified here, and it means that you get the same predictable, reliable change and security patterns happening alongside all of your application deployment and infrastructure management. And that's what's really exciting. I mean, when you hear us get all charged up in our voices, it's because people don't believe it's possible for you to take two things that were historically kind of painful on their own, put them together, and have something that's actually really smooth and consistent and reliable. And the reality is, yeah, these things were always meant to go together. We've just not been smart enough to get them all together historically, or we haven't had the right technology in place, and now we do, and that's what's so friggin' cool about all this.
Yeah. So, Tim, it's sort of a negative times a negative equals a positive?
Oh, totally.
Yeah. And of course, no pun intended with self-evident.
Oh, I love the free plugs, though. You can do that all day long.
All righty. Theo, before we move on, though, you're the non-security dude in our panel today, and I apologize if I offend you by saying that. But what do you think? Is it, it's a, to some of in security, it's a bit of an oxymoron that automating is good for security, and then vice versa, that automating security is good for DevOps. Is that sort of, is that punt for you, or is it not so clear?
No, it's pretty clear to us as well. DevOps in a large measure is automation, right? And if we automate all the processes except security, then we're basically neglecting a critical component of our continuous DevOps model, right? So today, you really can't have a point-in-time security component. It's got to be continuous, and if it's continuous, it's got to be automated.
Excellent. All right, let's move on to our next slide. And of course, this is what I alluded to earlier. Why is security automation good for DevOps? And I don't think any of us need to read these bullet points. People can see them for themselves. But I think Theo, you hit it right on the head that DevOps is about automation, certainly. And how can you automate everything and not automate security and not be a drag on the entire process? But let me throw something out at the panel and ask your responses, because we saw this in a recent survey we did. Does IT ops and development want security to be a bit of a drag on innovation and automation to make sure that the software that's getting out is in fact secure, isn't going to blow up in people's faces or create problems? Are we a victim of that's kind of what people expect from us? Tim, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that in a semi-misguided way, we've always believed that slow is safe, right, and fast is dangerous. And maybe this is a metaphor, analogy to people's experience driving automobiles, right? You think about the faster I go, the harder it is for me to keep pace. And well, the reason that is because us as humans are pretty flawed as creatures. Like we're good at a number of things. We're not good at a number of other things. Keeping up with the pace of information and the growth of compute capacity and infrastructure is not something that humans are good for. So we need to do one thing we are good for, which is building technology to automate the management of this. We can articulate what we want to have happen. We can have software, take things we articulate and make them reality. So why not articulate how we expect our infrastructure to be, look at any point in time, how it should react to certain events, how we should react to events as an organization, and automate those pieces. And I love the diagram because really, the ability for DevOps to accelerate delivery of technology to customers and get feedback faster and reintegrate that into our software development lifecycle builds trust inside the organization. But when you add security to it and you can rapidly detect and respond to changes in your security posture, new risks, new threats like Poodle and the Diffie-Hellman bit size issue with certificates and things like that have been happening recently, it builds trust in your customers because they know you have a functional, continuous security program like Theo mentioned earlier. It used to be we were cool with, Qualys scan here and there, or like, have a pen test once a year, and those would be sufficient for months on end, but the change happens on almost an hourly basis for organizations nowadays. So security automation, like Theo said, is not something that humans can do anymore. We depend on new emerging technology to give us that continuous visibility and continuous awareness of our security risks and help us manage them out of the infrastructure to build that trust with our customers.
Excellent. Andrew, Theo, any comments?
Yeah, I'd like to add that, in today's SaaS market, security can't be a drag. It cannot affect velocity, right? We have to, velocity is very important for SaaS companies, so anything in terms of the security component, although extremely important, has to fit in with the software development lifecycle process, right? So it's got to be integrated, and it can't slow the process down.
I agree with you. I think what I liked on this slide was the first topic, which was business enabler. And to that point, security has to remember that they are intended to be a tool of business enablement within the corporation. Long ago, 20-something years when I started, my career in IT tech, I had my boss at the time who pulled me aside and said, "Are you aware of what your job is here?" And in hindsight, I should have realized I was doing something wrong. But what he explained to me was, "You're in IT, you're in service delivery, you are a piece of the corporation. You enable everyone else to do their job better and more efficiently." And that's a concept that I continue to bring back, to my forefront within my life in security and within ops and now with DevOps, right? Our job is to enable the business to reach those business goals. And if we continue to be the hurdle as a security practitioner and not the helper, then we're never going to get there. And that's why I love that topic so much.
Excellent. And guys, so the reason I bring it up is we recently did a survey, and we haven't actually published, but over 50% of ops and devs said that they thought their organization was doing security right, which was surprising in and of itself. But then when those same people were asked what was the biggest drag on technology innovation adoption going faster, overwhelmingly security was the #1 choice. So it was almost like we know security is the #1 drag, but we think we're doing it right. And kind of just an interesting, it seems oxymoron in terms of how they view this, or hypocritical. But in any event, I think we're in violent agreement on this. Why don't we move on to the next slide? Okay, and so, let's talk about what are the keys to security automation. And, again, we can read the points that are here, but I'm sure everyone in our audience can as well. Theo, why don't we start with you on this one, though? What do you take as the most important keys to security automation?
That's a great question. I think the most important factors for security automation is really to have an automation strategy in terms of the software development lifecycle process, and even the DevOps deployment process, right? When you automate that from end to end, then you can integrate security in that entire process, and that's what we do here at JobBite. We use tools. We use very few point-in-time periodic assessment tools for security. We still do use some, but the majority of our security tools now, whether it's a real-time, code scanner for our Subversion repositories, or Evident.io, we also do white hat testing, which is continuous, so that it's all integrated into our entire lifecycle process. And I think that's the most important thing, is to integrate it, automate it into your lifecycle process.
I don't disagree. Tim, Andrew, comments?
I want to ask a question of Theo, and this is an important one. It's pointed on purpose because I think people misconstrue some of this. Theo, did you guys have security as part of that continuous pattern for DevOps from the start, or where did you guys start, and where did you bring security in your maturity cycle?
That's a great question. I think it was from the very beginning. It was part of our automation strategy. It was a part of our lifecycle strategy, right? We knew that if we didn't integrate security, the entire lifecycle wouldn't really work. We would be missing a very critical component in terms of security. The challenge was to find security solutions that could fit within that automation lifecycle strategy. Right? Evident.io, along with like White Hat, were the very few kind of security technologies that took advantage of this new DevOps model. Whereas like Qualys or some other security systems really kind of were still focused in a more waterfall kind of data center specific vertical.
So I think kind of what I took away from that, what I wanted to kind of accentuate for some of the people listening is, security has to be part of the strategy. It's very unlikely that's going to be the very first thing you implement as you build your way towards, because we know we have, there's a wide range of people on this webinar, some who are already at the level that Theo and his team have gotten to, and people all the way that are just starting out their journey on to DevOps, taking advantage of all the insights they get off DevOps.com, right? So those people, as they go through their journey, get down to continuous integration, continuous deployment, automation, config management. Security is a piece of that iterative puzzle as you build that in your organization, and that's a really key thing to take away. Nobody gets there from day one. You can plan for it, which everyone should be planning for as you look at these new ways to structure your organization, but it's iterative just like the rest of the cycle, and security is another one of those pieces that comes into the life cycle of your product that just continues, like Andrew said, to accelerate the business and improve the quality of what you're delivering to your customers. And that's one of those things that I see as key to security automation, is the fact that it becomes part of the DNA of your organization, and once you embrace it, you'll never live without it again.
Fair enough. Andrew, Theo, any comment?
I love the way that this topic is going. What you're seeing on the slide here is really points around integrations of security within the software development lifecycle. But we've already gone beyond that, which is we're taking it to a higher level. You've probably heard the concept of built-in versus, baked in versus bolt-on, right? A batch of cookies tastes much better when the sugar is in the dough as opposed to putting the sugar on the cookie after it's baked. And that's the point here that we're talking about is once you go with security beginning from day one throughout the entire life cycle of development and without the entire organization as a whole, you'll never go back, and you'll begin to realize that it is the most efficient way to do things within a corporation. And now we've also heard that it's difficult that if you don't start there to move to a position where it does become second nature. It's a mindset, right? But you can get there, and really that's kind of what we're talking about here today is places to start, and evident, not to use the word evident again, but it's evident that yes, this is functional and it works and it has value over time.
Excellent. Guys, let's move on to the next slide because we still have a lot to cover. So again, talking about keys to security automation, certainly automating testing is a big linchpin of automating security in a DevOps kind of framework. But why don't you, well, Tim or Andrew, or either one, you guys want to take just, because I'm not sure everyone in the audience will truly understand TDD. Done includes release and deploy. This is one I think we need to explain. Tim, would you like to explain?
I would dive more into the philosophical here. I think, Andrew is probably better suited to walk through kind of the how and whys of these, because it's something that his organization does almost probably every day with their customers.
Okay, why don't you do it then?
I will. Thank you. I'd be more than happy to. Certainly I heard a few weeks ago, Alan, you had Jamisha Fisher on, and she was talking about the ways to automate the infrastructure, security around the infrastructure like Chef and so forth. And when we talk about TDD, it's test-driven development. It's a way of developing code over time, and it really starts with this idea that you write your functional tests first, and then you write the code around it. So essentially, you don't get out of the start box unless your functions work. And the great thing about that is when you're using something like Jenkins with continuous integration, you immediately come out of the box with huge test suite coverage for all the code that's written. And when we talk about how does security integrate with this, well, wouldn't it make sense that just not write functional tests, but also write security test suites around the whole TDD process and infrastructure? And that really leads us to this idea of what does done mean? In software development, if you're using Agile, there's acceptance criteria when you write the Agile story. So, these are the things that need to be completed in order for the story to be considered done. What we call done means, is it really done? And that definition of done needs to include those security requirements as well. And we think, the prior slide, we said moving security more to the left. What that means is the security folks, the people who have much more security background than necessarily people in the DevOps organization, they need to be more involved. When stories are written inside the Agile framework, they need to be able to chime in and put in there, yes, that definition of done here does include those functional requirements as the end user, but as a security practitioner also needs to include X, Y, and Z. And that's really what we're talking about here, on this slide, which is make sure that security is integrated and part of the process of development. Very quickly, change control management. This is one of those things around DevOps and security that I usually say, there are bee dragons here. This is scary. This is a scary area for security when they think about that DevOps includes this idea of continuous deployment, where code gets checked in and whoosh, there it goes into the magic land of the production infrastructure. That can actually happen within a secure way. You can put slight speed bumps into that CD process and still meet those security requirements and the regulatory and the compliance requirements, right? There are ways for it to be done, and don't simply shy away from that process because of fear. Many companies are doing it. That PCI, HIPAA, SOX, and SOC, right? They've done it all. Right? It works. It really can, and it goes back to this idea of, yes, you can automate security. In fact, these days you have to automate security.
Fantastic. All right, guys, unfortunately we're almost halfway through, and we still, Theo has a fantastic case study we wanted to hit on. So, Jules, why don't we move to the next slide? And that is our case study. So Theo, I'd like to hand the mantle over to you and let you kind of explain a little bit to our audience about, what you've done with JobVite and some of the lessons learned there.
Sure. I'd like to also add that I have Brian Moorhead. He's my director of DevOps on the call, so I may actually turn it over to him one or two times during the case study. So JobVite is we're the leading recruiting platform for the SaaS space, and previously we were hosted on an on-premises co-location environment at Equinix in Virginia. And after crunching the numbers, we decided that it would make more sense in terms of cost, flexibility, and growth to go to AWS. Going to the cloud, it's very different than going to another on-premises hosting provider. And so once we moved to the cloud, we had this automation strategy. And one of the challenges that we had was a lot of the security tools that we previously used for on-premises really were no longer applicable for the cloud. And so we began this search as to, well, what type of security systems should we look for? And our shopping list included AWS-aware security solutions, something with low or no resource overhead. We don't like the idea of installing too many agents on our hosts. We will do so, but we don't want to end up with each of our application servers with 5 or 6 agents of varying applications. We also wanted to ensure that we increase deployment velocity and consistency. That's very important. In today's marketplace, security can't slow the process down. It simply can't because we have tight deadlines. And in the past, everybody said, well, slow everything down for the sake of security. I don't think that's true. I don't think we need to compromise velocity for security. I think we can have both. We also look for something with continuous threat detection, right? Periodic assessments. Our customers have gotten sophisticated. They no longer want a point-in-time assessment. They want to know that we are continuously monitoring our application and our change control for any type of security and threat detections. And then also tools that would help us support our compliance efforts. We are in the process of our SOC 2 certification. We are using the ISO 27001 framework for that process. So we're looking for tools that also help us in terms of reporting and compliance. And what we found was there were very, very few security solutions out there that actually met these criteria. But that was our search. Can you go to the next slide, please? So for us, it's all about automation. The key to velocity, the key to stable change control and quality is automation. And for us, we have basically 4 pillars of automation. We have CloudFormation, which allows us to template our data center build-outs. If we need to deploy, let's say, a sandbox environment for one of our larger customers, we leverage CloudFormation so that we can build an environment, let's say, in the morning, have them test for 3 or 4 days, and then have that environment destroyed, right? We don't need to save it. Sometimes we save the data, but it gives us that flexibility, and it's one of the core AWS services that helps us with disaster recovery, being able to build out, let's say, like low test environments that are ephemeral, also sandbox environments and additional QA and dev environments. Auto-scaling is another critical automation component. It allows us to scale additional application servers during peak hours of the day, and then shut down those instances at night during the fallow period, so that we can maintain costs and yet still maintain a high level of quality of service. And in Puppet Enterprise, we use Puppet in conjunction with config rules now to manage all our configurations, to ensure that the change management is the introduction of where most security vulnerabilities are introduced. So change management is very, very important. Puppet Enterprise is what we use, and then config rules to ensure that our EC2 hosts have the correct ACLs, are tagged correctly for cost analysis, and then code deploy to actually deploy our releases into production. It allows us the ability to do hot deployments, to basically deploy to a percentage of our application server fleets, and then do a rolling restart so that there's no outage for deployments. And in the center of all that is Evident IO. It's one of the it's our security scanning service that basically goes through our whole lifecycle process, along with White Hat and some other security services that we've adopted. Next slide. So we have this DevOps continuous deployment model. We build via Jenkins. We invoke the Evident IO API, and then we create a threat report. And then from that threat report, we decide, well, we'll either block the deployment, send it back to engineering for them to fix the build, or we just make a note of it and say, for the next iteration of the build, please fix these vulnerabilities that have been identified. And then we deploy QA. We basically rinse, lather, and repeat. At this point, I think I'd like to hand it over to Brian, and for him to comment further on our DevOps continuous deployment model.
Sure. Thank you, Theo. Yeah, so continuing here on the DevOps continuous deployment model, one thing that's interesting about working in AWS is that when you start developing against this cloud provider, you start leveraging their services. And in order to leverage those services, there's a few ways of doing so. One is by writing code that works against an IAM user's access key and secret key. Another is to utilize instance profiles. In our case, we're doing a little bit of both. So when we found that a few of our applications are using the access keys and secret keys of an IAM user, we needed to restrict what that user or set of users for the applications can do. We didn't want it to go out and modify security groups. We didn't want it to go out and maybe spin up another node in an auto-scaling group with unencrypted EBS volumes, things to that sort. So what we did was we integrated the Evident IO into the build deploy model, so that when we do build and deploy and it's out, we can ensure that the code itself isn't manipulating the environment with the keys that it has access to. For example, modifying one of those ELBs. And it's been working quite well. And as Theo mentioned, when we get a threat report, at that point we have a decision whether or not we want to deploy the next set of code into the environment, or if we should bring it back to engineering to see, hey, what exactly is going on with this new API module that we released that's utilizing the access keys and secret keys of this IAM user. Why is this IAM user trying to modify the ELB? So it's been, from that perspective, it's been working very well, and that's how we've integrated it into our life cycle.
And I wanted to touch on something that was talked about earlier in regards to test-driven development. I think that is the most critical. It's critical that that you incorporate test-driven development into your software development lifecycle. It increases not only velocity but also overall quality, right? In the old days, engineering, QA, and ops were kind of three different silos. Engineering would basically just write the code, throw it over the wall, and have QA test it to assure all quality. That model simply doesn't work. First off, it slows down velocity, and it also it also doesn't bring a level of quality to releases. So, test-driven development and also security-driven development, right? To incorporate that every step of the way, really QA should only be there to validate the final release. They're not there. They shouldn't be there to ensure that they're to find every single bug in a release. If it comes to that, then kind of like your SDLC has failed, right? And ops shouldn't be there to actually find every single security vulnerability, right? It's a final sanity check. If you are to have the velocity that SaaS companies today require, you've got to integrate both quality and security in every step of the way. Otherwise, you're just going to have security vulnerabilities and poor quality across your application. Next slide. So, why did we pick Evident.io? And the reason is, manyfold. It's a 100% AWS native application. We really like that. We love the fact that it was a clientless install. We're not a big fan of installing clients on individual hosts. We also love the fact that it was continuous scanning. Continuous scanning is important in a CI environment, and also it integrated well into our DevOps continuous deployment lifecycle. It supported our velocity and quality requirements, and we really liked the reporting capabilities. We liked the ability to create a report and then basically include it into our SOC 2 audit process, and also for periodic reports that we hand over to our current customers or prospects. It's one of many reports that we generate, but we definitely love the reporting capabilities of Evident.io. I didn't realize I had 30 minutes for this case study, but that's the last slide we have. I think that pretty much covers our story, unless, Brian, you have anything else to add?
Hey guys, this is Tim. I want to jump in. I wanted to probe both you and Brian.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was kind of curious if you guys could share a little bit about what you felt was most different between the way that you approach security in the data center versus the way you approached it in Amazon or a public cloud environment, for example, and how that impacted the way you guys thought about security as far as changing the requirements you've had, traditionally for a number of years and rethinking them entirely for what is basically a totally new environment.
Do you want to take this, Brian?
Sure. Okay, so in the data center, obviously, when you're working in a data center, the security vulnerabilities and how you take on security is entirely different, right? The services that are provided are hosted by you. The networks that you have are hosted by you. You don't really have a lot more control in terms of the devices that you're using, but at the same time, you also have to introduce the security to that environment yourself. Things are a little more static, not as dynamic. In saying, it's not as easy to scale up unless you're using VMs. You at some point have to start introducing new systems, but at a much slower pace. Whereas in the cloud, we're scaling up. We can bring our resource capacity up to 3, 4, 5x, just like that. But because we move so fast in the cloud, faster than when we were in the data center, things could be missed. And previously, things weren't missed because you'd have to put the order in for that server. You'd look at your current infrastructure. You'd try to introduce a security technology and make sure it's implemented across your board. But you'd have a lot more time. People weren't trying to move as fast as we're in their data center.
And also, the cloud poses some unique challenges in that your hosts are ephemeral, right? We have the ability to destroy EC2 instances on an hourly or daily basis and bring new instances up. When you have these ephemeral servers, you have to ensure that they are secure, and that goes to ensuring that the deployment of these servers are highly automated, right? That they adhere to certain security standards, and we do that through automation by using Puppet, config rules, etc. And we need a security offering that has the ability to check in real time these ephemeral servers as they are deployed. In the data center, you simply don't have that requirement, right? You can bring up 5 servers, run a point-in-time scan, and then you're good to go, because you rarely destroy a server in an on-premises environment, whereas in the cloud, you're doing it constantly. So you really need a platform that's aware, a security platform that's aware of the ephemeral nature of the cloud. If that answers your question, Tim.
No, that's great. Thank you, Theo.
Excellent. Okay, so guys, I'd like to move us along to some questions. And actually, before we hit some questions from the audience, Andrew, Tim, are there any sort of final statements that you want to make before because usually the questions will take us right up to the end point. Andrew, I'm going to give you a chance to do a wrap-up.
Thanks, Alan. I think it's now become very clear with, especially in the last hour, but certainly in the last few years, that, as we've all said, you cannot continue to deploy software without a sense of security around that. And the concern has always been with DevOps around the speed. And like I said earlier, that the speed is actually to your advantage. And similar to our folks at JobVite have talked about the ephemeral nature of the cloud, I mean, that is also can be used to one's advantage. You think about these problems from a different perspective and understand that we can always integrate security into everything we do. It's just a matter of being part of that team, understanding that DevOps has brought about a cultural change within the businesses, and certainly now the integration of security is probably the next cultural change that we're going to see, and it's time for us to embrace it and move it forward as opposed to being that hindrance to the business, right? Let's be the helping hand and make sure everybody's happy. We can deliver the software stronger and on time, right? That's my spiel, Alan and Tim. Thank you, and look forward to any questions.
Oh, totally. And I agree with Andrew 100%. I think I'll leave it one simple one, which is DevOps and security were two things. It's like peanut butter jelly. They were made to go together from day one. May not have been intended that way, but they make something so beautiful together that it's irrefutable that it's the right way to go. And I think that as forward-thinking organizations and thought leaders like Theo and his team are discovering and reaping the rewards of it and talking openly to others about it, we're going to see the adoption rate pick up and see some really cool stuff happening in the next few months and year or two as people really begin to innovate and push the limits of what we can do with this newer, continuous, near real-time security capability that the cloud's brought to us. So I'm really excited for it. I'm glad we got to have, Andrew and Theo and Alan here to help test everyone, and I'm excited to see what kind of questions come up.
Excellent, Tim. You stole some of my thunder there. I would just like to add one thing to what we've all said, and also, again, thank you, Theo, for kind of opening the kimono a little bit about what you guys are doing and how DevOps and security are working together. We've spoken a lot today about how automating security helps DevOps and how, and so we're trying to get security into that. There's also the reverse view of it that we need to convince our security brethren with, and that is how DevOps automation helps security. We need to get over this hump where we begin to realize that going faster makes us more secure, makes us safer. And I know it's, counterintuitive, but really automation makes us more secure. And when that becomes self-evident, again, when that becomes, common knowledge, I think you'll see greater adoption by security. Anyway, let's move into a couple of questions if we can. We mentioned blowing away the deployment in case of problems. How much info do you lose by no longer having instance logs available? Sounds bad for forensics. So I'm not sure if it was Andrew or Tim mentioned, if something doesn't work, we just kind of blow it away and start over. But do we blow away the logs too?
I can actually answer that. So we forward all our logs to a centralized log stash server, so that even when we blow away a ephemeral instance, the log file data is captured, right? We don't, so nothing is lost, just the ephemeral instance. Any specific data is captured in our log stash infrastructure.
Yeah. Okay. Next one. Well, there are evident tools to use for automation, especially in the CM section. What are the tools you suggest for security, passive code review, active code review, injections, pen testing, etc.? Tim, I thought you mentioned a few. I know White Hat was bandied about. Andrew, or Theo, any suggestions of other tools?
I'll jump in there. If you consider your pipeline, and it has certainly the guys from JobVite mentioned this too. There's a tool in there called Jenkins. If you think about Jenkins, is kind of this master. It's really not necessarily a scheduler, but it's an orchestrator around your code, and you can tell it to do all kinds of things. Just not take source code and build a release, but during that process, you can actually tell it to take the source code, build a release, launch an instance in Amazon that's in a private, a VPC, for example, and then using APIs, scan it with all kinds of, both commercial and, and open source tools. For example, like we mentioned earlier, there's, the standard and normal kind of vuln set that we've seen for many years now, the tripwires, the Rapid7s, the Qualys kind of scanners, right? But to be more, let's bring it down a little level into the code base. We need to start also running in an automated session, static and dynamic, code analysis tools. You had Dave Mortman on it, a couple weeks back, and he had mentioned Veracode, which is a great commercial tool, and I would throw on there something like Brakeman is a good tool if you're using Ruby to put in there as well. And the thing to do here is, if you want to get started, bring in the open source tool set. They're free. They're usually easy to establish. And there's somebody who's blogged about how do I install or bring in free tool X into Jenkins, and start by looking for open source static analysis tool for the language that you're using. And like I said, I'm sure somebody's blogged about how to integrate it with Jenkins. And now that becomes part of your normal process of delivering code, and you immediately get feedback. And while you're in there, make sure that you're capturing that output, and you can measure your process over time. You want to know where you started from, and you want to know where you are today about how secure your code is, or how well it is applicable to a standard like lint checkers, for example. So that's my 2 cents. Alan, I'll step out. Thank you.
Sure. Tim, you know, besides Evident IO, obviously in your security career, you've worked with most of the tools out there. What do you suggest?
You know, what Andrew touched on, what Theo and team are doing is exactly right, which is you leverage something like Jenkins as a central orchestrator, and as you do things like A/B deployment in the cloud, when you deploy, you know, B is running production, A is the new deployment going out, you run your smoke tests, you reach out through API, and you call all number of technologies to support it. We think like security tools are no longer security tools unless they have a real API, so the ability for you to launch network level scans, application level scans, to do cloud infrastructure security assessment, to do almost boundary checking and verification of your policies against your infrastructure. Like, do we have anything that got deployed that's not running the right, you know, golden image for our last build, or do we have something deployed outside the regions of operations we're in? These kind of security practices all become, you know, just a basic part of that DNA. And when you talk about the tools you can use, you know, we've mentioned White Hat, we've mentioned, you know, things like Qualys. You can actually hook into things like, you know, Nmap and Rapid7 for network layer scanning and app scanning. You can do Arachne for, you know, web app vuln scanning and things like that. There's a lot of open source and commercial tools that are out there. The first question you ask when you're looking at things is, do you have an API and where are the docs? So you can look at it and you can see if someone hasn't already integrated it, which likely they have if there's an API, then you can find the way to integrate it into your own process and then share that with the rest of the world back in a blog post, so the next time someone does this, they figure it out much easier. But tying those things together is really one of the keys, and the fact that Theo and team are living proof of what you can do when that's possible should be a great motivator for everyone that's on the webinar to look around and say, hey, you know, iteratively, if we wanted to add one kind of security check to our automated deployment through Jenkins, what do we do first? And you add piece by piece, and you're building this cool little layer cake of your DevOps process and security practices, and they're coming together, and they're just phenomenal once you have it all built together over your maturity cycle. So,
excellent. All right, let me run on to our next question. Time goes so quick, it amazes me. What security framework would you suggest for TDD and DDD? Theo, or perhaps, is it Ben, is your colleague? Any suggestions from you guys?
That's a great question. So I don't know about security frameworks specifically for TDD, but you know, we base our security framework here at JobBite on the Cloud Security Alliance, which is kind of a subset or a cloud-aware framework for the ISO 27001, which is obviously an expanded scope from the CSA. But that's what we use for the basis of all our security certifications. For example, for SOC 2, SOC 1, as well as HIPAA, etc.
Excellent. Any other suggestions from Tim or Andrew? Or?
Yeah, this is Tim. I'll jump in real quick. I would suggest if you have a regulatory framework you need to abide by, your customers are asking for it, use that one. The dirty secret of frameworks out there is they're 80%, just like each other across the board, and then 20% differentiated. So you can build actually a common control framework that satisfies more than one and meets your business needs and satisfies your customers. That's your ultimate end goal. It's not, I'm going to design against PCI, even though I'd never intend to get it, because that would be kind of the wrong motivator. The motivator for you is, what's the one that represents most like the business need we have and most like the customers that we represent? And let's build and let's use that one. Then you can verify that with your sales teams, because they're all going to tell you up front what kind of standards are being asked for in the sales cycles.
Excellent. Here's a great question. I unfortunately can't help us. I don't not up on it. Do the DevOps security tools that we've been talking about tie into the Fed security standards such as NIST, SP 853? We have for sort of Fed, FISMA, and FedRAMP kind of stuff. Tim, do you know?
I know that we at Evident do, but I'm not here to try and sell you guys something. So the tools that are out there, this is going to go back to kind of a common control framework. What's funny is NIST 853 R4 is a big piece of every regulatory framework out there. They all kind of look back at the NIST standard and pull a lot of relevant things from there, and then slightly up-level certain controls based on sensitivity of data and things like that. So I think that when you take a look at application-level security stuff, they very often don't dive deep into the compliance standard controls. They're really looking at vulnerability analysis and threat analysis of things. When we dive more into the infrastructure levels, the controls that are being surfaced by infrastructure assessment tools often do map back to NIST very clearly. And that's for obvious reasons that, I always say, just like, give it enough monkeys, typewriters, and they'll create all the works of Shakespeare. Give enough security people, a request to generate strong security controls, and you kind of end up at the NIST standard. Some deviation, but we all get pretty darn close when we say these are the things you should be doing. So a lot of tools will. The question you ask those vendors when you're in the cycle of trials or whatever, or the open source community is, how do these security assessments and reports map back to NIST control sets, and then that will give you your answer of how much work you have to do kind of correlating the two versus how much is going to come out of the box.
Okay. Andrew, you know anything about it?
What I actually like Tim's response. What I was going to add to that is, if you're paying for a commercial product, they ought to give you that answer for you.
Yep.
Right? You should be able to go back to them and say, how does your product map to all these controls that I need to be compliant to? And if they don't have the answer, then you should probably go find a different vendor, quite honestly.
Okay. So we've only got time for another question or two, but this is aimed at you, Theo. Which tools are you using for security scanning? I thought it was clear, but let's make sure people get it.
Yeah, so we use Evident.io. We use Sentinel Scan. We use Nessus. And then internally, we also use Burp Studio. And then we use a whole slew of in-house homegrown security kind of applications. So the thing is that there's no one tool that can give you 100% coverage. So I'm a big believer in picking kind of best of breed security systems. And I like the fact that I use a variety of different vendors because they all have kind of a different way of tackling security. So it gives me what I feel is more complete coverage than going with one vendor only, because then you basically only have kind of one security model to base off of.
Excellent. Guys, we're already past the hour, so I'm afraid I'm going to need to stop our questions there. We do have the rest of your questions. We will submit them to the panel, and if we can get them answered, we'll post them along with the slides and recording of today's webinar on DevOps.com. I want to thank our speakers, Andrew Storms, Tim Prendergast, and Theo Kim for appearing today. And I'd also like to remind everyone that we have another great webinar on SecOps and DevOps scheduled for December 18th. I don't know if we have the time yet, but that one will feature another friend of mine, Gene Kim, as well as Shannon Leitz and Tim Prendergast, and promises to be a great webinar. You can sign up for it now on DevOps.com, and we hope to see you there. So Tim, Andrew, Theo, thank you very much. And for everyone attending today, thank you very much. This is Alan Schimmel of DevOps.com.
Thank you, guys.